Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Amy Hollander and I'm one of the instructors for EDUC 250. This week we are going to start taking a deep dive into the NIET rubric. You learned last week that most teachers are evaluated using the NIET rubric and or compass. While you are in our teacher education program, you will be evaluated using the NIET rubric. And therefore, we are going to start doing a deep dive into some of the standards in this class to prepare you for when you are observed in your other courses. So the first standard we're going to discuss is standards and objectives. When planning effective lessons, they need to be aligned to the standards, and this is dependent upon the teacher's ability to create and communicate clearly defined learning outcomes or objectives appropriate for the students. In many ways, this indicator on the NIET rubric is the foundation for all other NIET rubric indicators, because if the teacher is not clear about what he or she wants students to know and be able to do as a result of the lesson, the balance of the lesson cannot be properly developed or implemented. Both the students and the teacher should understand what is to be accomplished or what is the goal during each lesson. So let's take a look at this part of the rubric. Remember, the NIET rubric is what your university coordinator will look like when evaluating you when you're student teaching or in your residency. It's also what we are going to be using in all of your coursework throughout your career at Nichols. So here you can see on the left-hand side, standards and objectives is the topic for this rubric. And then above, you can see all of the scoring criteria. So if you earn a 5, that means you are significantly above expectation. If you earn a 3, you are at expectation or proficient. And if you earn a 1, then you're significantly below expectation. Our goal for our candidates is for you all to graduate from Nichols State earning 3s on this rubric. That means that you are a solid teacher and that you can meet every single one of these NIET indicators proficiently. In this lecture, we are going to focus on how to get significantly above expectation or at expectation for standards and objectives. So let's look at what is at expectation or proficient. First, the objective needs to be clear and explicitly communicated. Most learning objectives and state content standards need to be communicated. That means that the teacher or instructor has the objective or state standard visually present on the board, on the PowerPoint or however they're presenting their lesson that day, somewhere in the classroom, or on the student work. The teacher also needs to say the objective, and in many cases, particularly in elementary and middle school, we have students say the objective in an I can statement. When you go out and observe next week or the week after, you will probably observe a teacher saying an I can statement for their lesson, like I can graph using bar graphs, and then have the students saying it back to them. These statements have the students repeat the main goal or objective of the lesson. Also, the sub-objectives are mostly aligned to the lesson's major objective. Sometimes we have to teach students different steps to get to the main goal of the lesson. Sometimes we have to teach students how to graph before they can learn how to read a graph. And then also the expectations for student performance are clear. If you do all of that at the beginning of a lesson, then you are going to earn a 3 and you will be proficient at this part of the rubric. Teachers need to continuously make reference to the objective and standard throughout the lesson, and sub-objectives are developed to review prior learning of a student or a new sub-skill that directly impacts the development of the main objective or teach a process to master the main objective. We're going to go into that a little bit more on the next slide. If you are trying to earn a 5 or exemplary, then not only do all learning objectives and state content standards need to be explicitly communicated, and the sub-objectives are aligned and logically sequenced to the lesson's major objective, but also the expectations for student performance are clear, demanding, and high. So let's look at an example to make this a little bit more clear for you all. Here, the teacher says, our objective for today's lesson is to create a pie, bar, or line graph that illustrates how classmates responded to a questionnaire about sports. You will be provided with a rubric to help you. As a review, what are a few components of a pie graph, a bar graph, a line graph? How do we transfer and or organize the questionnaire data within a pie graph, a bar graph, and a line graph? So what can we tell so far? Are most learning objectives and state standards communicated when the teacher says this? Are the sub-objectives mostly aligned to the lesson's major objective? And do the students understand the expectations on them for their performance? Is that clear? So take a minute and think about that, and maybe even write down what you think is going on before we break it down. So this example demonstrates how the teacher plans questions for students to ensure their understanding of the objective and focus for the lesson. When learning at the objective above, and there were several sub-objectives that could be identified too. So we know that she clearly stated the objective of this lesson, which was for her students or his students to be able to use data they collected about students in sports to create 3 different graphs. The teacher referenced the objective, an overarching goal or standard throughout the lesson. The teacher then used questioning to bring students into the process. Remember, we heard the teacher asking the students different things about the 3 various graphs. The sub-objectives were also there. So in this case, the sub-objectives were to understand how to apply the pie, bar, and line graph, to be able to calculate results of surveys into percentages, which is prior learning, and to be able to apply the rubric to the project, which is for process. The providing a rubric also makes the teacher's expectations very clear. You're also expected to continuously make reference to the objectives and standards throughout that lesson. So what does that look like to earn a 3 or proficient? That means that the learning objectives are connected to what students have previously learned and that the state standards are displayed. If you remember, in week 2, we discussed state standards and you went to the louisianabelieves.com website and you looked up some of the standards that you might be teaching based on the grade and subject that you desire to teach in the future. If you want to earn a 5, then the learning objectives are consistently connected to what students have previously learned, know from life experiences, and integrated with other disciplines. Additionally, the state standards are displayed and referenced throughout the lesson. This descriptor is about making connections in learning. It is important for teachers to connect new learning to prior learning so students are able to see learning as something that is continuous and to make real-life connections about how this learning impacts their lives. I think we can all agree that when you are in a classroom and the teacher is showing you something that directly impacts your life, you become more interested and engaged with that material. This connection can be done in a variety of ways. Additionally, posting the state standards in the classroom provides a visual purpose for why students are learning what they're learning. I'm sure we have all sat in a class before and wondered, why are we learning this? However, if students see that we are covering exactly what the state of Louisiana wants us to cover, that helps with mitigating the why do we have to know this question. So let's take a look at this example. The learner will convert inches into feet and then feet into square feet to determine the size of a given space. So that is an objective. And then written on the board is the state standard, 5, period, MD, period, A, period 1. Convert among different size standard measurement units within a given measurement system and use these conversions in solving a multi-step real-world problem. Now, if you were to say the state standard to your students, they'd probably look at you funny. But if you say, today we're going to convert inches into feet and then feet into square feet to determine the size of a given space, that might make more sense. However, if you say what this teacher says, then the students will really understand it. The teacher says, our goal for today's lesson is to calculate and determine the size of a given space in order to purchase the correct amount of supplies to remodel the space. Yesterday, we discussed that gallons of paint are sold based on the amount of square footage of a space. Last night, you measured your bedroom, the bathroom, and one additional room within your home, and determined the length and width of each room in inches. How are we going to determine how many gallons of paint are going to be needed to repaint the rooms in your home? What can you tell or see through this example? Are the learning objectives connected to what students have previously learned? In this example, we can see that the teacher explicitly reminds them of what they discussed the other day about how gallons of paint are sold based on the amount of square footage of a space. The teacher also brings in relevancy by having the students use spaces that they live in themselves to measure. And as stated, the state standards were displayed on the board. Finally, on the NIET rubric, we also have that there must be evidence that most students demonstrate mastery of the objective. You will notice that if few or no students demonstrate mastery of the objective, that you would earn a 0. Teachers need to continuously make reference to the objective and standard throughout the lesson. Here is where this idea of student-centered versus teacher-centered objectives come into play. This descriptor is the most important one of all within standards and objectives. No matter what teachers do or do not do, if students do not learn the information, then it is a waste of time and effort. Teachers must focus on what students have learned as opposed to what they have taught. So that is where we get into that student-centered versus teacher-centered. Effective teachers plan assessments, those could be verbal or written, that enable them to check for student mastery of the material taught, and then the teacher will make modifications to their future lesson plans to meet the needs still evident in the student work. So what if you teach a lesson and then give them some sort of an assessment? Many of you in high school and middle school may have experienced an exit ticket where you have to take a little quiz or answer a question before leaving the classroom. Or maybe your teacher assigned homework or had you write something down in your math notebook for the day. And the teacher will check that to see, did the majority of my students master this objective? If they didn't master the objective, then the teacher is going to need to go back and see, where did the wheels come off? At what point did my students not understand what we were doing so that they can go back and they can reteach that specific objective before moving on? Now, how do we know in one lesson if students have mastered the concept? What about a multi-day lesson? So again, there needs to be some evidence that most students demonstrate mastery of the objective. If it is a one-day lesson, you could give them something called a summative assessment. That is an assessment where we are going to see if the students fully understand this. This could be a quiz, this could be a homework assignment, or this could be an exit ticket. Now, if you have a multi-day lesson, then what you might need to do is you might need to put little assessments into each day to see that your students are understanding the sub-objectives that are going to get them to the final objective of that multi-day lesson. And again, that could look like an exit ticket, that could look like a Kahoot game or a Nearpod game. If you guys don't know what those are, some of you have experienced them in your own classroom so far, but those are just using educational technology to quiz your students. Additionally, you could have your students turn in a written assignment or some sort of homework assignment for you to check to see that they are understanding what they learned that day before you give them that end of unit quiz or test. I hope this presentation has helped you break down the standards and objectives portion of the NIET rubric. Again, this is the first category that you will be assessed on when you are teaching, and it's a really, really important one. Now let's talk about your field experience. Your next field experience is called Field Experience 2 through 3. We want you to have a general observation of a classroom, plus we want to add the NIET rubric standards and objectives. What you are going to do is you are going to do 2 observations in 2 different settings, one in your area of certification and one outside your area of certification. So if you are birth to 5, you want to observe a kindergarten through 3rd grade class for your area of certification. However, we would recommend that you go up to a higher grade level for your area out of certification. If you are a secondary math major, we would want you to observe a 6th through 12th grade math class, and then we would want you to observe a different subject area for out of certification. Here are the instructions. Conduct a general observation. Provide a rich description of the physical appearance of the school and the classroom you are observing. Give a detailed description as well as your opinions on what you would replicate and what you may set up differently. Make sure you observe the different areas of the classroom and how each classroom is physically arranged. So for example, you may want to discuss how are the desks arranged? What are on the walls? Is there an area for students to sit on the floor? How are students greeted when they walk into the classroom? How does the teacher start a lesson? Also describe the teacher and students in regard to their activities and behaviors, as well as the general atmosphere or feeling you get about both the school and the classroom. So you might want to discuss things like, do the students and teachers respect each other? Are the students happy? Are the teachers happy? Do you feel comfortable here? Does it feel uncomfortable? Paint a picture of what you're seeing at each school. We would like to hint that a rich description is more than one paragraph. And when your instructors are reading this description, they should feel like they are there with you. So please describe what you hear and what you see so that we can feel like we are right there in the classroom with you. We also want you to focus on how the teacher uses, implements, or reinforces the standards and objectives on the NIET rubric. Reference notes from class where we unpack this part of the rubric. Remember that we are focusing on the teacher being proficient. That's getting a score of a 3. If the teacher is proficient, they are doing exactly what they should be doing. Take detailed notes during your 1-hour observation, focusing on standards and objectives. Make sure that you are seeing the beginning, middle, and end of the lesson so you can see how the teacher is continuously referencing back to those standards and objectives. Provide a detailed and thoughtful response to each and every part of the domain of the rubric. That means we want you to look for, is the standard written somewhere in the classroom or on the student work? Does the teacher say the objectives and the sub-objectives? Does the teacher make their expectations clear? Does the teacher use real-world examples or make it relevant to the students? And does the teacher continuously discuss the standards and objectives throughout the lesson? When you are collecting evidence, feel free to quote the teacher. So if the teacher uses an I can statement, or if the student says, the objective of today's lesson is, write that down and record that so that we can see that as well. If you have any questions about this assignment, please email your instructor, and a template is posted for this observation both in the course document as well as on Moodle.